Whoops.
Oh boy. Nobody's on right now, so
Yeah, we got it. Honey on. Still messing with stuff. All right, solved.
And there we are.
There we are. Good morning. Welcome back to the Explicit Measures podcast with Tommy, Seth, and Mike. A little bit of skipping a step and getting into production here was just a minor glitch this morning, but we're back on. So all wrapped up. Merry Christmas. Happy end of the year, 2021, closing it out. We are still here doing podcasts. So even though we're on break, we're still thinking about data.
Happy Tuesday.
happy Tuesday. Are you guys recovered? Are you in the holiday mode, or are you just happy to be here?
I've had a couple of days of no thinking about work, so that's been really, really relaxing, I think, for me.
Yeah, my wife over the last couple of days has looked at me and just stared. Are you okay? And finally yesterday I realized I'm like, I don't think I know what to do with myself.
Yeah.
I'm just
Yeah.
like, I go do a thing, hang out with my kids for a little bit, and then I just stand there. I'm like, I'm so used to dealing with
Running back
massive
downstairs to the
amounts
computer.
of problems,
Yeah.
during the day that just taking a few days to adjust to what normal life it's probably like. So
I don't know if it's not a good indicator, but so I was planning work today and yesterday, and like by Sunday at noon, I'm like, I cannot wait to work. Like I was just like, I cannot wait. It was just getting too short with everybody. It was like, oh my goodness.
Sometimes you need just like a little distance every so often,
How
especially.
can you miss me if I'm still here?
Exactly. You can't miss me if I'm not gone. Heart grows fonder when, what is
Yeah,
the
right.
distance makes the heart grow fonder?
Yes.
Any good gifts from you guys this year? Anything that was stuck out, clear winner for your kids, or things that you just kind of loved?
You need to go to Sam's, and if you have $200, you need to buy a bounce house. So
Bounce
my
house?
mother-in-law bought it for the kids. Yeah, it's like a 10-foot by 10-foot with a slide.
Oh,
And
nice.
we fit in the basement. And this thing is insane. It was like $160, $180, and is literally just a full-on
Clear
bounce
winner.
house.
Clear winner.
Clear winner.
Yep.
Clear winner.
It's amazing. Is it very tall? Like, is it tall enough that it actually fits into your basement?
Yeah,
or it's getting pretty close to the top.
It's getting pretty close to the furnace. So
I gotcha.
We have rules with the kids, except they're 5 and 3. So
not so many on the rules.
Yeah. So we have pillows set up out near the wall because I'd rather them hit the wall than the furnace.
Yep.
But at the same time, this thing is like the exercise they're getting kind of thing, especially as we go in the winter.
Yeah, totally. There's
huge.
Nowhere to burn off all that extra energy.
Exactly.
Totally get that. Excellent. Seth, any kind of clear winners in your realm this year?
I think I was the clear gift giver this year, that's for sure.
Oh,
trying to make up for time spent at work. I spoiled the wife a little bit, and then
awesome.
Probably the best gift was to my son. Got him a proper RC car.
Nice.
So
I loved RC cars growing up.
Put it on a training mode. The thing was still
whipping around
fast, super fast. He's like, Dad, what does it go like at normal?
Not
like,
doing
well, I'm like, we're not doing it for like a month or something. And then I got curious.
Yeah.
I was like, well, all right, let me set the settings. Like do what you shouldn't do, which hypothetically you can't take them on a road, right?
Yeah.
Thing does 35 miles an hour.
Oh my word.
Whoa.
Rips around.
Someone's gonna get their ankles hit. That's gonna
up until
that's the
up
worst.
until even the snow, right? So we had no snow until yesterday, and even then wanted to take it out. And I look at him, I'm like, if you take this out, it's going to take you longer to clean it
Mm-hmm.
than it is to like take it out. He's like, I don't care, Dad. I'm going to do it. And then like by the end of the drying and cleaning session, he's like, never
Not
doing that
not
again.
again. Not again.
Like, yeah,
Yes.
it's not as much fun, is it?
Uh-huh.
This is how you properly take care of nice toys, though.
Yeah, exactly.
So
Hilarious.
that's probably
That's
the
awesome.
fun one.
That's
But
very
yeah.
cool.
What
We
about
had
you?
we had the
I see a is that a front loader? No, it's not a front loader behind
oh
you.
yeah,
Is it
you
a
can't
bulldozer?
I don't know
Is
if
that
the
a
camera can see
bulldozer, Mike?
yeah, so I got a Lego Technic set again. I got the D11 Lego Technic set that's gonna be busting out here pretty soon. The son and I are gonna go through and build that one out. We got the traditional Legos for the win. At the Carlo family.
Yeah.
So we had it was pretty good there. The kids really enjoyed it, and it's kind of like we buy a little bit of peace and quiet with those. They love their sets. They go to their rooms. They build them. This year, we're introducing my son Liam to more of the Star Wars era. So we're going to be adding,
Okay.
we got a Star Wars set. We're probably going to start watching other Star Wars movies. I think we're at around the right age.
There
So
you
that's going to
go.
be a really fun. Now it becomes the hard decision of do we watch the episodes in sequential order, or I guess is it called machete order? I guess is what you could call watching the Star Wars movies, where you jump
Yeah.
around 4, 5, 6, and kind of because the storyline they try and fill in the gaps.
Starts later.
Yeah, because the way they produce the movies, it makes sense to run that order, and then they kind of try and fill in gaps, and you can kind of see the thread of the different stories and the normal story and the backstory, and I don't know what we're gonna do.
The problem with that is you're going like light years backwards
Oh,
in
yeah,
technology.
totally.
And the kids are probably going, why
What?
does this look so different?
Yes,
You just
exactly.
start with 4, 5, 6, and you say 1, 2, 3 never happened.
Yeah, Jar Jar Binks was not a real thing.
Exactly.
Mhm, mhm.
We were sharing pictures too from the holidays. I loved everyone's traditions.
Yeah,
Looks
we
like
were
everything
sending
went
pictures.
well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the pajamas came in time for Seth.
Yes.
Mhm.
Saw the spread
Day
looked
of.
amazing. Yeah, man alive.
Couldn't have got any better
So
than that.
yeah.
We'll jump into the session. So let's jump into today's topic before we talk about Christmas the whole day. Today's topic is going to be around just thinking through. We have Power BI, we have reports sitting out on PowerBI.com, and we have users picking up data, sharing data, and just kind of talking through here is how do we identify who is leaking data from your Power BI data source, right? So you have data, you have governance, stuff that's happening there. How do you identify those things? So I think, Tommy, I believe this is a topic that you kind of found or came up with an
Yeah.
article. So
So
give us a little bit more background here.
yeah, so this I just sent the article out on YouTube and LinkedIn. I want to make sure it's on the episode on Apple and Spotify.
Yep.
So this is from esprenia-ba.com or Bernard Aguelo, if I can say his name right, Areglo. He is basically kind of been the master in calculation groups and articles and content.
Mhm.
And this recent article that came out in October is kind of what he did was he basically created a calculation group and a way to make a user principal name like a binary like set of characters, so he can append that to a visual. The user doesn't necessarily know like that there's their name in it, and so they can basically fingerprint who's exporting data.
Mhm.
So it was just kind of like a neat thought exercise, but I think that kind of inspired us or made us think about, man, there are a lot of ways that we know that our data kind of gets out there, not even necessarily sent on social media, but just even internally.
Mhm.
Uh, and this was a really great kind of solution, or just kind of, again, like a working session on one way to track that. But that led us into basically talking about, what is leaked data? How much should we care? And what should we do about it? And that's kind of the idea, because we know how much is being exported. There's other ways, but that people kind of get data from Power BI or data sources. But what's our responsibility as the pros? What should we do about it? And yeah, that's kind of like the idea. So the article's out there. It's pretty nifty.
There's a lot going on here. He's doing things in M. He's
Mhm.
building special keys or codes or characters. It's quite interesting to see where he's going with this, and I like the idea of being able to thumbprint data. Microsoft also has, if you look at their data governance or their data quality policies, there actually is, you could put governing policies around your Power BI data as well. I believe that's also
Mhm.
in there as well from their data governance and quality assurance. What do they typically call that? I actually don't really know the name of that off the top of my head. You know what I'm
The
talking about,
data
Tommy?
protection.
Is it,
The
yeah,
da-
data protection. I think it's the data protection things
Mhm.
where you can actually see things there as well. Um, and now I believe also if you block certain data protections, you can not allow people to download or connect to analyze an Excel through different data models. So you can actually add protections there that will block out certain features there as well. So
S-
thoughts on this? Like, do you think this is a problem? Maybe we'll start there. We define kind of what the solution, the issue is here, right? We have users connecting to data models, building reports, maybe exporting data and then sharing that around. How do we can kind of see that happening there? What do you guys think? Is this a big issue? Do you see this happening a lot in your Power BI instances?
Do I see data security leaks a lot?
Yeah, or
No.
do you feel like it's like a major problem, like in your experience?
I mean, in companies in general, yeah, data security is a huge, huge thing that they're going to invest a ton of time in and resources and money. They should anyway. Um, the interesting thing will be is like how much of that we think is part and parcel or something that we need to, kind of manually go build within Power BI report. So it'll be interesting to see where you guys want to go with this. But I think in general, along with my voice apparently now leaving me, um, the you don't want your data leaving your company. The I think first and foremost, I mean, we're obviously not security experts here, but any anytime you sign with a company, like I guarantee they have
Hmm.
uh very heavy wording in their contract with you about what they're going to do to you if you go leak their company data.
Yeah.
So first and foremost, your job is on the line,
Yep.
100%. Um, and secondarily, like what are the things your organization is doing to potentially monitor what people are, how that behavior is happening within the organization? What are they tracking as far as what goes out of the organization? And I think they've had to get a lot more uh, probably up to date or creative now that most of the workforce is remote, right? If you didn't have policies
Mhm.
that would understand whether or not, data was leaving from somebody's machine versus from the location that you had everybody working at,
Hmm.
there was probably a lot of work that had to be done during COVID. But yeah, I mean, it's a significant issue in that it's highly valuable. I mean, you're spending, especially nowadays where we're probably collecting more data than and not doing anything with it. Those are valuable resources that, could make or break a company potentially.
Yeah. I guess if when I look at companies, I feel like the technology to be able to share information or share data between individuals is accelerating faster than the company policy is able to keep up with what is acceptable practices for doing those shares. I think some companies maybe have stronger policies there, but to your point, Seth, we're bringing everything to like lakes now. We're bringing we're basically making it easier to bring all the data to one place because it is easier to work with while it's in that area. But the training, the policies, having companies really think through the implications of what happens. How do we like ho- the number of companies I've gone into, I've kind of talked through this, but most of them don't really consider this a major issue, and I don't think it becomes a major issue until companies actually go through either a leak or has issues with data being lost from the company.
I think there's kind of two different kinds of leaked data that we can talk to, especially as the professional or the Power BI, the business intelligence
Sure.
role. I think there's one where you have really sensitive data or protected data that should not be in the hands of like most users.
Yep. Product
And
product price quotes or product pricing, something
yeah,
along
even
those lines.
email. This is one of the things that
Mm-hmm.
I ran into years ago where we basically had this like email list pull report
Yep.
back when Power BI was, fresh, and you could say, "Oh wow, look at all the things you could do." And but the thing was, those email addresses marketing would be using to create
Lists.
lists.
Yeah.
However, some of those people unsubscribe, which is illegal. Kind of,
Yep.
so
Yep.
or some people shouldn't even have their email being shown.
Correct. Yes.
Like, and a lot of times if you have a table, usually like, the records tab and the information, we don't think twice about a lot of that information. The other thing too, when it comes to leaked data in terms of internally, when you export, there's the two main options. And this is something I don't think twice about usually either, where there's summarized data, which is just the visuals from
Oh yeah, that's a good point too.
for the bar chart, but then there's that underlying data. I don't
Yes.
know if you've ever done that and really dived in, but it has practically everything that would be related to that table if you were just had a bar chart and you did the underlying data.
Hmm.
And there's probably a lot of that should be protected or should not be seen by anyone who can just export data. Because I think there's that repercussion side, not necessarily just someone has exports data from Power BI, then posts on LinkedIn an attachment like, hey, visit my GitHub repo of my company's data.
Yeah.
Um, but there's that other side of it to the consequences where for marketing or for sales, where maybe they don't need to see that user contact information. They should only see what's available in Dynamics.
Sure.
So there's all that information I don't think we'd think twice about. And then obviously I think there's the other side of the coin in terms of what I consider leaked data too, is when like exported data goes wrong, where basically someone exports the table from Power BI or exports the underlying data, they do their own, in a sense, analysis, and they're starting to, in a sense, communicate to their team like, oh, here's our actual sales numbers. I made a few changes in the
Mm.
numbers. I
Mm.
changed Bill to Jim because that's his customer.
That's also a
You
really
know,
an internal issue as well. It could be huge. Again, trusting that is eroding the data trust that is coming
mhm,
from certain tables or certain data sets.
right.
Yeah, very true.
So that's where I
Hmm.
can consider the two parts of leaked is one, that sensitive information, then two, the information where it can be communicated that we may never be aware of.
Seth, you're going to say something?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with there's multiple facets of it, right? Like companies, you're typically protecting yourself from things like I think a lot of work goes into protecting yourself from allowing the data to get into people's hands that they could be destructive with it,
Hmm.
right? I mean, you think about security access
Totally.
for a lot of the things that you're
Mhm.
talking about, Mike. You don't
Yep.
set up a lake and just be like, "Yep,
Oh, everyone go
let me
play
let
with
me
it.
grab
Right.
the AD group for the company
Yep.
and here you
Sh
now have admin on the new Databricks access. Have fun."
Yeah.
you know,
Good luck.
um, you were like, "What is this?" You're like, "I don't know. Figure it out, man."
Hmm.
Um, so you don't have that habit. It's very, very limited as far as like what's going in there. How is it getting out, right? So you have um, the limited access on the stores of information for the
Yes.
first part.
Yep.
I think the one we have to keep in kind of top of mind is what is in the data model
Mhm.
for sure. Um, and understanding who potentially has access to the data in the data model and what that we have. I think our biggest role in all of this is when and if you're using row level security, that you have properly and thoroughly tested that
Mm.
100%, so that even when it doesn't, right, it doesn't work or something breaks, it just doesn't show anything,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
The worst thing that could happen is, as a BI professional, you set up row level security and have two people or two companies or whatever the case may be accessing and filtering data, and one doesn't work, right? Where they see everybody, that would be a huge issue for you as the person who built the row level security on the singular model.
Yeah.
um so I think that's for me the biggest one that stands out in this conversation. And then we have a lot of other things even within this data realm, like say you have access, say you got data out there, like the sensitive data structure, the sensitive data pieces, right? Like
Yeah.
Mhm.
it's even a stricter, more lower level policy around who gets access to financial information
Mhm.
or GDPR stuff. How do you have to handle that? Like what can you track or keep in your systems? And I think a lot of work goes into those realms for companies. And then the other side of this is potentially where Tommy you came in with this is okay, like say something gets into a Power BI report and it's perfectly acceptable to be there, but somebody exports it and sends it to somebody,
Hmm.
or somebody has an Excel file of this documentation and they send it to themselves. And I don't know about like your companies, but I can guarantee you if I sent any sort of file to my private email address,
Hmm.
my
Stuff's
IT
flagged.
security team is talking to me,
Yep.
right? Like even within my own environment, I had a scenario where I was moving a bunch of files from one SharePoint, file to another, and it was a large enough move of data that our security team reached out and like, hey, we noticed you deleted a ton of data. And we're like, yeah, it's over here now. Like, okay, verified that it's there. Okay, thanks.
Yep.
So
Yep.
Mhm.
like don't be naive. Like, your company is understanding like certain actions that you're taking and monitoring within their ecosystem, and for sure following up on those things as well.
And I like the idea here. There's kind of two parameters of this leaking data information. I thought Tommy's summary of leaking data via internal leaks, right? There's data that's being published, people are exporting data, and I'm fixing the data for what our sales numbers really should be this because of XYZ is not correct. I think that's just as detrimental as well, maybe
Mhm.
not just as detrimental. There's probably different implications there, but I think that's very impactful to the team who's working on grooming, curating, making that data happen, because it erodes their people's faith in what's going on with that data elements. I think that's a very interesting. I guess I never thought of it that way as breaking it down into those two parts. I was thinking more of leaking data like externally. What can you connect to? Uh, and this is I also would point out here again, one of the things I like around Melissa Coates' training is the idea is there needs to be just at least a policy, something put down to paper, like here's what we're going to do, and requiring your employees to go through here's how to manage this data, or where we're allowed the data to be accessed, and what are the rules around exporting it. And I think maybe you guys are both saying it is start with more of a closed environment, remove can't download things, stuff's getting summarized, trying to put some controls on there. I do remember a number of early consulting agreements around Power BI where the default setting for publish to web was on by default.
Mm.
And I don't know if this has changed or not, but I'm pretty sure that that's off by default whenever you start a new Power BI tenant. I recently started up another Power BI tenant, and I saw that the shared publish to web was turned on, which I thought was quite interesting. But anyways, check that. That was one of our communications that we did. Is if anyone is governing Power BI at all, the very first thing you should do is go into the Power BI tenant and go see if publish to web is turned
Mhm.
on or off. I immediately make sure that that is turned off on all tenants that I touch, because that is one of what I would call the largest data leak. Because people think it's so easy to share. Oh, I'll just get this secure URL and we'll just be able to pass this around via email and everyone can see the report. I'm not a big fan of how that's not secure sharing, and I think that's a very companies should be aware that that feature's there and know how to turn it off, and provide training for people who do legitimately need to use it, but have them understand clearly why that is there and what are the implications of sharing data that way.
Yeah,
Uh,
we hammered on that one a
Yeah,
lot.
a
And I
lot.
suppose it makes sense to keep hammering on it, right? Like
Yeah.
regardless. The nice thing with those
Yep.
admin controls are um, always make sure that something like that is turned off and only turned on for certain people or groups, which you can do now,
Yep.
as opposed to just being a flat off and on. I did want to clarify one thing though, because if you were saying that I'm suggesting that a more lockdown approach in an organization is better initially.
No, I guess maybe I'm not
I wouldn't
suggesting
agree
that.
with that.
Well, to a degree, right? I mean, if you're going to look at so there's settings on data sets and reports where you publish them that are just kind of
Yep.
on and you don't really look at them very often. It's like to Tommy's point, right? Do I select if it's summarized or not summarized? That's in the settings inside the Power BI report. You have to go to a couple menu options to get down there to see what people can actually export or touch inside the report. Can they say their own bookmarks? Can they not? Like there's a certain settings there that I don't know if I'm always checking them on every report that I'm publishing out. And so I think my thought here is, uh, either review those more frequently to make sure that you know exactly what's going on with those data points as you're publishing these reports in. But you can always relax. I would say it's easier to relax data things than to restrict them, right? If there's certain data sets that are very mission critical, I think you have to identify which ones are very important, and then as a company, come up with, is this something that we're willing to allow people to connect to in Excel or not? Is that something? Do we only want you using the report? I think having a couple of those questions, and I think you start off with, here's just the report, give it out to people, and then see what they say. And if they like, oh yeah, we like this data, we'd like to see these data tables inside Excel or something like that, and then you can like open it up and gives a bit more control there. I'm not saying lock down the entire tenant, but I'm thinking like on those couple data sets that are important, making sure you have like a checklist or a thought list of here's the things that we need to make sure that we're willing to share or not willing to share. Does that make sense?
I think what I'm hearing you say, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that on on a data model by or report level, it needs to be part of your exercise
Yeah.
to understand the data volatility, or it should be part of the conversation
Yes.
before anything is done with the report. And on that level, I absolutely
That's
agree.
that's kind of where I'm trying to go with it.
Mhm.
I'm like, there's
Okay.
probably certain data that's like, it's fine. You guys can share this stuff, no problem. There's other data that, maybe it's coming through the BI team, right? It's stuff that you're grooming down or you're producing reports for clients, and you got to make sure, double check, triple check, make sure that there's not data being shared across clients, right? Those kind of things.
It's a I find it funny that for us to connect to our like source data like SQL, usually we have to be on the right network or VPN
Mm-hmm.
for us to connect to any tables. And then like
Yeah.
I have to, remote desktop in to make sure to actually connect to the data sets. But in Power BI, if you actually looked at an underlying data set for like a good data model for like a bar chart, it pulls in, if you have all the columns in that table that is pulling from, it's going to pull in all of those columns.
Yep.
And it's like, why VPN kind of thing? Because
Mm-hmm.
it's basically the raw source.
Yep.
And I think, again, some of that's fine because, like, maybe you need the order ID, right? You need to verify that or the customer ID. But I know for myself, like, I don't think there's a good enough policy or process in place where, okay, what information, what columns are sensitive where we don't need people sharing that or using that in a way that they shouldn't. So that's like the first part when I think of, in a sense, leaked data or exported data.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I'm going to go back to this. Well, I guess let me ask: like, is exported data truly a problem? Because we know it's one of the most utilized features and by consumers.
Every BI tool has the same challenge, I think, right? If any BI tool you bring to anyone, doesn't matter what tool it is, where it comes from, the first question that's almost always asked is, "Can I export this data?" Regardless. And
Mhm.
I think that's just a standard practice for people. Just they're comfortable with it. They can get out this information and put it into their own analysis or append or add new information to it. I think that's just something that's going to be part of the plan. You just got to think about it. So I don't think exporting data, you block it all the time. I think there are strategic areas where you try to block it or try to mitigate that risk.
I think the interesting thing that I come to, and we're right about the witching hour or the witching 15 minutes where we get into a conversation and the value starts to come through.
Exactly.
This it strikes me that this hasn't been part of our setup
Mhm.
questions, and it should be.
Mm.
Is what is the sensitivity of data, and are there any export ability or issue,
Mm. Mhm.
permissioning that we should have on this report that you need to dive into and update some properties so that people can't export the detail like the raw or get access to look at the model behind the
Yep.
scenes, because that is
Mhm.
what that permission allows. We haven't had that part of as part of our conversation. It absolutely should be, right?
Mhm.
Because if you think about it, I think where this conversation around my mind is going is like, what are the things we as individual, report creators can do? Because the larger policies and what happens in terms of larger data security and leaks and things are owned by other teams, right?
That's true.
But I do think for keeping this thing in mind, Mike, to your point, on a report by report level, you are responsible. Whether you know these features are out there or not, like then you need to go open your properties pane and
Yep.
see all of the different things that you can control. Go understand row level security, because if you're in a realm where you're building a model that's, for different audiences, you have to make sure you know how that works appropriately. And those are two very volatile, or could be volatile, areas that you're directly responsible for as a report author.
Question: have you guys utilized yet in a production report object level security?
Through embedded, but not
Yeah,
via
but
Power BI directly.
object level security is interesting. So my understanding of object, let me clarify what
Mhm.
object level security is to you, or to me anyways, and then we'll go from there. Object level security is the ability to, based on user, hide various tables or items inside the data model that user technically couldn't see, correct?
Right.
My
We
understanding of this
Yeah.
is you can't see it, but it's still there. So object level security hides things, but it's still like if you connect it to Excel, if you knew the table was there, you can still run calculations against it.
You can still run calculate. I honestly haven't we haven't seen like had a huge need for it right now, but probably we do.
Well, I'm thinking
So I
like
don't know about the
object level
underlying.
security is like security, like it's you read the articles, or at least I've heard people talk about this, and I could be wrong on this one. So if anyone's in the chat and has used object level security, feel free to correct me or add some comments there. But my understanding of object level security is it's more of like a hide and show based on user permissions.
Mhm.
It's not as much as a uh you can't technically, like, you can't see it. Okay, so when Kevin's saying yes, yes to object level security, no user can run calcs against it. So
Cannot.
if the object is missing, they can't run a calculation against that table. They don't have permissions to see. So it yeah. So I thought it was the other way around. You just couldn't see the table, and object level security was just kind of hiding things from you. I had to do more research on I don't use that one at all usually. I'd have to look at more. I didn't even have to understand like what is a good use case for object level security. Like when would you want that to be a present or not?
It would probably be sensitive data, like, again, just because of scenarios I have been when it comes to, like, email address or customer ID, where someone shouldn't be able to necessarily just put that in the CRM or create a new contact or,
Yeah.
based on the information available, just because of what role they're in. So, they may be able to see all the data, but they just can't see the email address. Um
Yeah, I think what's relevant, in the Microsoft blog, like let me just rip through this paragraph.
Yeah. Go
For
ahead.
those who missed the public preview announcement, object level security enables model authors to secure sensitive tables or columns from report viewers' sensitive data. For example, includes personally identifiable
Okay,
information.
that's what we were talking
Mhm.
about earlier, like
From the
the email
standpoint of
address.
Yeah, from the standpoint of the user without proper access, the secured table or column does not exist. In
Oh,
addition, object names and metadata are also secured to prevent a malicious user from discovering that such an object even exists.
Hmm.
This is added layer of security prevents users without the appropriate access levels from discovering business critical or sensitive personal information. Authoring OLS rules in the Power BI dataset can be performed with tools that utilize the XMLA endpoint.
Mm, okay, here it is.
Valorant.
Do you want to use object level security? Can't do it in desktop. Got to use an
Good.
external tool.
This is why I haven't used it
This is
before.
why I haven't used
Yeah.
it. Right there, that one sentence. Yeah, I was actually reading the initial
But that's
preview
really
announcement.
that's fantastic to know, though. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
it sounds like a very robust way to implement additional things in the model.
Yes. Yeah, and you can. So here's a couple notes here. Reading the article
Good.
here is if you want to edit this, or if you want to change your object level security, you must have the XMLA endpoint as
Mhm.
read write only, because you have to go either modify the data set locally, or you have to go modify the data set in the
Yeah.
service to do this kind of stuff. So this
Mhm.
is an added layer of security. And the example they give, that's like, here's finance, marketing, sales teams, like different data model that could be used for multiple different audiences. Well, finance team can see more of the financial numbers, but marketing shouldn't see all the
Mhm.
numbers that they need to see. They should see something less than that. So there might be quantities of units sold and maybe not all the pricing pieces. I could see how that uh, security model would change based on each of the departments.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. I'll have to play around with that some more. This is interesting that yeah, I really like this. So I'm actually looking at some articles here from Microsoft talking about the just data protection in Power BI in general. There's a lot of like really, Microsoft Cloud Defender for cloud apps, Microsoft 365 data loss prevention also attaches to Power BI. Well, you can start seeing notifications, alerts, anomalies when things are happening frequently, and what kind of anomalies are not happening. These are There's other deeper issues here or other deeper tools that are being integrated into Power BI. I think honestly, if I look at the feature set of this, a lot of these features are newer, and I think these are coming out of the idea that Microsoft has been shifting over the last year towards more of that enterprise facing view of lens of Power BI. Because in the early days, we didn't have any of this stuff for Power BI. It was just kind of there.
Yeah,
So
I think.
yeah,
Go ahead, Tommy.
no, you go ahead. I'm gonna
No,
change the
I
subject a
agree.
little.
I mean, I'm not gonna say it was the Wild West, but like the
It was
the
more free than
the
it is now.
security layers and things are certainly just enhancing the solution as far as
Yes.
enterprising it, right?
Yeah.
Because I remember having many conversations right off the get go with organizations who, people wanted to use Power BI,
Yep.
and their security guys would come in and cause a lot of problems, right? As far as like
Yep. We got to secure this.
implementation,
Yep. How do?
it's
Mhm.
very, there's not a lot of that built into it. So they had to, take extra precautions to make sure that things were in a state that they could understand what was going on,
Yes.
right?
So I want to change a little because this I think can be a great use case that I think is probably underutilized for a lot of reports because this is one of these topics where there it's almost like this hear no evil, see no evil, where we don't know how people are using the exported data or if like whether it's something like email address or obviously if you have something like credit card, but that
Yeah. Totally.
information, yeah. But like that type of information, it might be in the report, it may be in the underlying data set, but if we don't hear about it, we don't know if it's an issue. So the kind of problem though is I think especially when we're dealing with the exported data is how much should this be managed because we can do object level security do row level security to hide certain information, so that kind of solves some of the in a sense problems where that user shouldn't see that information, but that still doesn't solve that other side of the leaked data that to me I think is probably more prevalent for a lot of organizations than we realize. And I only believe this just because we've actually created this year 5 reports because users were exporting data from multiple reports and then creating their own pivot tables to send to their departments.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, this is one, a waste of time for them because
Data's
there's
already there. Data's already
the
right.
data's already there. But
Yeah.
then two, they were doing, like, hey, Jim's actually USA here and not here. But in a sense, who's to say that the operations manager? So that type of information, we have no idea what's going on with the exported data.
Mhm.
So I guess my question then, or my take is, shouldn't this be managed some way? Because once something's exported, we have no insights into it and to how people are actually using it.
So I want.
Yeah.
So I think this is an interesting topic. Just in general, it's very hard to answer this one because if you give Excel export data access, you have a hard time knowing like where does it go after that. This is this is what the IT group would typically call shadow IT, right? You're taking exports of data. I'm taking all this Excel stuff out. I'm reshaping it. I'm doing something else with it, and then it becomes thought of as truth. But this is again, I think this is goes back to a lot of the training that came out of Melissa Coach's area, where she's walking through this and saying, "Hey, you need to have like certified stamps on data sets and reports. This is like a data, I think that's to some degree, this is a company-wide policy that says, hey, we're as we are asking about these numbers or this kind of data, this data needs to be corrected for or ready to go, right? This is
Yeah.
our stamp of approval. We say this is good data, and that's what you adhere to, right? I think there's a cultural thing there that you have to kind of instill or work with leadership to instill into the organization that these are where our numbers are coming from, and this is how we're going to use that.
I don't think that's data security though.
Data
Or
data
explain
data trust.
how is that data security?
Well, when you're getting to so you're getting data from a data model, right? That is the story of truth. I guess
Okay.
Tommy's referring to like
Yeah.
how do these other paths
And
of data stories come from that single data source? So like one example would be, I do know that Alex Dupler there's a method where you can turn on audit logs or logging for Power BI. You can see all the queries that come across your data center.
Mhm.
So it's a lot of data, but you can see every single DAX query by visual by user. So
Oh,
if you
yeah.
go hit an MDX query against the Power BI data model, you know which user hit it, and you know what query was being run against the data model. So you can observe kind of after the fact who's hitting large tables of data and who's exporting to Excel. So you can see it kind of occur, but you don't, once it leaves that step, right? Once it's inside Excel, now what? You really can't track it much more beyond from
Right.
there.
I guess in my mind, we're kind of diverting off the original topic, only from the standpoint that the only time this is relevant in my mind is unless you somehow need to audit how people are utilizing the data, and this is the only way they could have access to it. Um, Even then, like you would have to have a report that could not export, and that you would have to understand who and how what they're looking at in the report.
So
I just don't see
yeah.
the use case for that in my mind, and it could be because I'm not part of some of the more strict industries, but at the same time, to me, that's not a data security thing. Like the reason I say is this is data security to me is um, somebody getting their hands on data they should not see.
Mhm. Okay.
So as a professional who is building reports and has responsibilities for what data gets out into the wild, there's these things we've talked about all up to this point. But Tommy, what you're bringing in to me is like data sharing in unknown ways in an organization.
Mhm.
Of course, there is.
Yeah.
Like what's ironic to me is like I come from the enterprise side, and you say more of like the hard,
I know.
hard admin
Well,
level things than I would ever do. Or like I originally had like just turn it off, like turn everybody's access
Mike
off.
said that
Mhm.
actually.
But
Let me
but
put that. Yeah.
but I think like to me, I'm more an advocate of listen, if you have people that are utilizing data the completely wrong way in your organization, like Tommy, to your point, you build a report, then somebody in their infinite wisdom goes and rebuilds the same report with a filter on it and then starts sharing that manual thing to everybody else in the organization. That's dumb. That's stupidity, right? Like that's something you want to curb in your organization. So you're like, hey, whoever, don't do that. Like go use the report and add this filter, and now you got what you got. And it's coming from the source of information. No, you don't need to export my results, put it in Access, create your, Excel document that takes you 6 days to refresh. I've got that handled for you in this report. That to me is more of a data culture thing, like
Mhm.
something that you need to within your organization show people how to utilize the different access to data that they do have. And if you're going through these efforts of building reports and providing insights to people, obviously either you need to adjust some of the insights you're giving, maybe give them in a granular form, maybe do a report builder report, so they have an Excel document dump, realm, whatever. But ultimately, like use the data that they're
Right.
they have access to in the right ways, as opposed to this being a data security thing. The only time I think that might go into like the data security thing is if like you built a model that only shows, you know, uh, person one their territories and person two their territories, and then they start collaborating and sharing, and they shouldn't be doing that.
Right.
Mhm.
Well, that's a problem, right? That's a security issue, or could be. Yeah, I'm just trying
Right.
to like think of a scenario
Yeah.
where people are sharing internally things that they shouldn't.
Yeah.
um but that ultimately isn't out in our realm. right? Like that's within that personal agreement a company has with an individual saying like, listen, there you could have access, to private information that could harm the company if it got out, or if you share it in the wrong ways, you're personally responsible for this information while you're working for us.
So
And
this is
for the record,
Kevin
yeah, go
Arnold
ahead.
brings up an interesting point here on YouTube. Here he says people. Sounds like more of like a people problem than it is a tech problem. And I think to Kevin's point, it's harder to solve these people problems, these data culture problems,
Mhm.
because it's working with people. And like, I get it. Like, I got to get stuff done. We got to get numbers figured out. We've got to calculate things. We've got to do stuff, right? And so anytime there's a tool in front of you that's resisting you or giving you more friction than you want, right? It turns into this, like, well, how do I get my answer resolved, right?
Right.
You're trying to go to this path. For me, it's like I try and run the path of least resistance. What's the how can I automate this? How can I make this easy for me to get my answer each time? And um, to the way that you described it, Seth, I liked your description there and felt like this is a conversation that you would bring up to like their manager or managers or the data information CIO, CTOs.
Mhm.
Like these are higher level conversations that need to happen that are going to talk to what is happening in that data culture, what we're doing with that export, what we're doing there, and why is so to me this is potentially a view of something else that's broken, right? If there's someone who has to shift data around so the numbers quote unquote look correct, something else potentially is not working appropriately. And maybe that conversation needs to be had. I don't know.
And for the record, I'm not saying shut everything off, shut the exported
Mhm.
completely off.
Mhm.
Right. It was almost more of a question too, in terms of does is it could it be a problem, the exported data, for in the sense of like how should we manage it? Like how should we approach exported data or that those use cases? Because again, we'll never
Gotcha.
know unless someone brings it to our attention that there's these exported local files that people are creating. Again, not saying it's bad, but again, it can lead to
Uh, I'll
uh,
go back to the log analytics thing again. I threw the GitHub for the Microsoft documentation around log analytics into the chat window. So this is a good place to start. I think I have the opinion of you can't change what you can't monitor, right? If you're not looking for it, you're never going to figure out there's a problem or an issue there. So at first you have to figure out who's exporting what, right? That's kind of like the very first question I think you started with.
yeah.
And then once you identify who's exporting what, then you can kind of at least look at, I mean, if this is something that's important to the company or this is a report that's being shared around, I'm guessing it's happening fairly frequently. And there's a lot of, exports happening from that user or users to get that information out into their process. So first and foremost, I think you just turn on who's exporting stuff and then come back and say, okay, is that okay? And whose role this is, this is now where the people problem I think becomes into a play here. If this spans across departments, the BI team to sales team, the BI team to HR team, whatever that is, marketing team, now whose role is it to talk to both teams? And that's where I think that you need that buy-in at the leadership level higher up about what's going on.
Because because that's really the only thing we can control, like the information protection that we talked about.
Yep.
That cannot be managed by Power BI admin. That's a global admin of Office 365 that
Totally.
has to be configured beforehand.
Yes.
And if you don't have any in your company who's doing that, you're not going to have it. In the same way with the object level security or role level security, that necessarily shouldn't be the role of the Power BI Pro to, in a
Oh,
sense,
you're bringing up a good point here, Tommy. Yeah, keep
yeah,
going.
it shouldn't be my responsibility to dictate or, in a sense,
You just need to follow the company
designate.
policy. You're not trying to dictate company policy on this one.
No,
Yeah,
no,
yeah.
but like if I have all these columns and rows, should it be up to me to say what if without any prior knowledge or instruction
Yep.
on what people can see and can't see?
Yep.
So, and again, but what happens usually is we don't hear from anyone. We create the report, something gets leaked in terms of something that's sensitive, and it's like, why was that in the report? Which is kind of the use case, like because we didn't know. So should we go through a process, maybe with this part of the data governance, where we are more proactive on working with like you said, the chief data officer, if you have one, the finance or even legal at your company to say,
Mhm.
can we just understand what data should be seen, or like what attributes or information should be seen by whom, and at least kind of create a guideline if you don't have it.
You said something interesting that I don't agree with at all,
Okay.
or I want to clarify. One of the two. And that would be, it is 100% your responsibility if you have access to data that you're sticking in a model and you don't stop and ask the question,
Hmm.
right? Innocence by omission is one of
Hmm.
my biggest pet peeves. Like, yeah, well, Gary sent me all this data and I just stuck it in the model. But
So
didn't you think that SSN column with all of those digits, was a bad thing to light up for everybody? Oh, well, he sent it to me. Like, that's the type, like, I
blind
would I
trust.
would
Yeah.
say it's still the responsibility of everybody in the organization to understand what pieces of information require you to go, I I can't tell you how many times I've been in a position where I was like, "Do we really wanna show our customers that side of, like,
Mhm.
our company?" And 90% of the time, the answer is no. Like, well, yeah, but salesperson so and so was asking for it, and I had access to it, right? It's still my responsibility,
I think it.
if anything,
Yeah.
more so
Bring up the
because
red
I
flag.
do have access to those pieces of information
Right.
that I clearly understand or question whether or not something belongs in a report for somebody.
And I think this is a good point here. A distinction point here is question everything. I mean, to some degree,
Mhm.
right? I mean, I go into conversations today. Is like we talk. What does your company talk about PII data for? What can we not show, or what should we show in these dashboards, reports, data models, whatever? And I think this also alludes to less is more. Bring in is like this is a good data model technique, right? Don't bring in all the columns from a table. Just
Yeah,
because you have access to the user table doesn't mean you bring the whole table and
Right.
all columns. Bring in as minimal as little as you can initially, right? Until there's a specific request to ask for more. And when you ask for more, then you can open that up based on conversations.
I think holistically, this conversation has done a couple things for me, which is great. One is I'm adding two pieces to my intro of discovery about a report, right?
Yeah.
One is, am I working with any sensitive data? Um, do we control exporting of this? Whatever. The other is the audience question that we have is typically related to like what sort of visuals we're building, and technically, I think the other part of that audience question is what is the gate by which, when this report is out there, people get access to it? Are they part of the audience that should see this information? Because we can do a lot around, like, who are you sharing the report with? What sort of our RLS is set up? Like, but we're not, like, I think we gloss over the, okay, after it's out there, who gets access to it and what should that, be, should that look like?
Mm-hmm.
The other part of this is, Mike, where you were addressing, we've kind of been playing around, is a lot of these conversations are part of, I think, governance, right?
Mm-hmm.
Things that the monitoring of what is happening in the ecosystem, using the APIs, understanding like what each report should or shouldn't be doing, and I think that's all part of what you get when you start adopting more of the adoption roadmap,
Hmm.
right? Like, you get more of these pieces that ultimately create a better data culture. And I think for me, the most important thing is, yes, all of these things around data information and security are extremely important. But identifying where the breakdown is just as important in my mind, because if if you don't, the worst thing that can happen is you have a breach, you have something that happens, and everything gets locked down. And all of a sudden,
Hmm.
you have a culture state of fear and nobody shares anything, and it will kill your business. Like, it literally just stops things in tracks, because we've walked in places before. It's like, I can't, I don't want to share that.
Yeah,
Like, we
because
can't do that.
something
Like,
happened once that
why?
was bad.
Why?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
And then
So,
what happens is you push people more into the shadow IT
correct.
space that's even
Correct.
more like
Then
unsecure,
now
I feel like.
now now
Yeah.
to your to Tommy's point, right? We've seen this in the past too. Like,
Yep.
ultimately what happens is you walk into a place and you're like, okay, so we're talking about this BI initiative. What are we looking at? We're looking at 6,000 access databases. I'm sorry, what? Right? Like, everybody creates their own thing because
Yeah.
there's no sharing happening at all,
Yep.
and people need to do their job somehow, and, like, you're almost making the problem worse
Yep.
and more susceptible
To
to
different
larger
stories of the same
breaches
Right.
data.
of
Yeah.
data
Well, even
versus
yeah,
the opposite, which is,
I agree.
okay, we have a big problem, or we want to avoid a big problem. Let's make sure our security policies for data access are there. Let's
Yep.
make sure we're doing our due diligence, and then let's make sure that the lay information worker knows and understands how to use and access our data, because we want a healthy culture of data sharing, but
Yes.
there are limitations to that, and
Yep.
everybody needs to know that there are certain things that will get you fired, right?
I like
And
that.
and ultimately it comes down to trying to promote that healthiness where you don't want to create fear. It's like, hey, here's the things we do share, what we don't share, but like, and also curb bad behaviors. I think that Tommy described in the beginning, where it's like people are doing their own thing for no reason at all. And that's
Right.
what we're trying to avoid, I think, with a lot of, or um, not avoid. It's a lot of the things that Power BI solves is ripping out all that manual work that people are doing. So you don't obviously don't want them to go do it off your reports again.
Right.
Like,
Mhm.
I used to be an SSRS guy, right? Like, you develop a paginated report, somebody exports it and then does their whole Excel magic with it. Well, they don't have to do that anymore,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Right.
This is
So
man,
I
there's so many
yeah.
good points in there. Uh Benny from YouTube asks, "Do you see the proactive approaches how do sorry, let me read that let me read it correctly now. How do you see the proactive approaches to light up possible breaches, and where do you draw the line between a proactive approach versus a reactive approach?" And I think you were trying to touching on some of that topic there, Seth, when you were talking about this. You don't want the knee jerk reaction to be able to be so stark that you lock everything down and you now force a culture or data culture where everyone has to build their own thing. And now I think you increase the risk of different stories from different people. Numbers are conflicting. We don't know whose number's right. How do we get to the real numbers of the business at the end of the day? I'd be curious your thoughts on, where's the line for you guys where we talk about how much planning goes into reactive versus proactive?
I
That's
mean, go ahead,
yeah.
Tommy.
That's actually great question, because I was literally just about to ask, like, what is the balance and what are the minimum requirements an admin and approach should do? I, to me, I think it's if you're an admin of your Power BI tenant, the things that you should probably immediately start doing is begin to work on setting up the governance with your legal or your boss, kind of understand what information is like, in a sense, that needs to be majority protected unless you're an executive, and what other information should not be seen, like address, who should be able to see address. So go through that and then just be able to begin that discovery on what other information I might not be aware of that's company specific that marketing doesn't need to see. um and then the other part, I think the labeling and the information protection is probably a great solution, but again, that needs to be set up by your company beforehand. I think the other part too, what I'm probably going to start doing is going through the reports and making most of them summarized for the export data. And the reason I say that is we create a heat map, and um, what we realized when we looked at the underlying data set, it had everyone's address and the zip code. It was like, whoa, like it was way too sensitive information that they didn't need.
Yeah.
So going through and making sure that what's exported is really what people, in a sense, need to see to work with the data. They don't need 75 columns with the billing address, so to speak. But from there, I think it's just really understanding the tenant settings and then just going through your report settings in terms of what can be exported, how much can be exported, not turning things off, but understanding, like, hey, our company has specific protection around, our customer IDs
Yeah.
or our product information. this is sensitive information. Only the product team needs to see that. I would never have been aware of that unless we had that conversation, but kind of understanding what information, obviously the global public identifiable, but then what is company specific that maybe only certain teams should see.
I I feel like there's some level here where there needs to be like this kind of like open conversation. Maybe this is part of the center of excellence. Maybe this is not. I don't know. But I feel like there needs to be some of these, as I'm thinking about, like, I'm trying to make a hot list of like what's proactive and what is reactive things. I think some of the proactive things is, having open, candid conversations around what your data policy is. Do you have one today already? Do you need to build one? Having conversations around what data governance looks like in your company. And I think if you look at all the data assets that in your company, there's probably a couple of them that are going to, in your mind, bubble to the top that says these are some of the most important ones. I think it'll be a challenge, especially if you've had Power BI around for years. You're going to have hundreds, thousands, I don't know, lots of data sets laying around. How do you go through all of those and evaluate which ones are the key ones that we need to look at and review? So I think you also have to go through, and from a assessment standpoint, you have to proactively look at like what is our most important data? Where are the data models that are getting used the most frequently? Let's look at and evaluate those first, so you have at least a quick hit list of those key items at the very beginning. Because I think about this and I get very overwhelmed. I'm like, oh my gosh, there's so much. There could be so many things we need to address inside companies around where reports have been built or whatever. I get overwhelmed. So I need like help me figure out what is the short list. Where do I put my efforts to make the most impact right now? And then I think part of the reactive piece of this is, and this is maybe a feedback loop, Tommy, that your company already does very well, is having surveys. Something that comes out. Hey, is this data making sense to me? Is the data aggregated in a way that makes sense for me to use on a daily basis? How often do I feel like I need to export data from this report? Maybe adding some questions into that survey mechanism,
Right.
and then maybe even having like an open form that says, have you discovered a data set that seems like it's not right, or there's a column in here that you're missing, or there's too many that you don't think is supposed to be here? I think maybe even soliciting the consumer audience or the people consuming this data to a help us identify where there may be leaks of data, and maybe put in that survey or sentence on the center of excellence. Hey, if you have questions about any of your data things, go to this page, fill out this form. It helps us identify what data set this is coming from, and just tell us, hey, I found a column for user addresses in this data set. I don't think it should be there. I think having that, being able to allow people to submit those things, can then help you groom down and figure out where there are potentials for issue in your data sets. I'd be curious your thoughts on that.
I think you're right on, right? If I say things slightly differently, the proactive things, the bullet list that comes to mind is understand your company policies.
Yep.
Proactively engage with the data security team and security teams to understand like what are they trying to do with data within the organization and
Yep.
externally, to make sure that you're in line with that, or you get what they're trying to do. Go review what admin capabilities, if you have that permission within Power BI, all the options, for the things in there that are relevant to this. Understand what sensitive data looks like, because every one of us is personally responsible for the information that gets sent out to a wider audience. Add it to the conversation of the report, right? What is the data security, sensitivity, audience? Ensure people only have access to what they should. And then last one would be like have a list of reports that require monitoring for access, right? Like periodically, it's going to be something that you're going to be, on your top list of who has access to this report, and control what we can in the realms of, keeping data security in mind.
Yeah, I like that. Any thoughts for you, Tommy, as we kind of wrap here? I think this is probably we're hitting like the lull at the end of the conversation.
I think Seth, yeah, I think he said it perfectly. This is one of the things that I don't think a lot of us do. It's always on the top of our minds. And it's definitely one of those things that once something breaks, it's basically like if you don't have insurance in your house, like, why do I need it? Until your roof goes down.
Until it's in flames and you're like, dang it, I should have insurance.
Yeah.
But to that same analogy though, Tommy, though, right? You insure your house because it's a huge liability if it gets lost.
Right.
I think it's the same. I think it's the same kind of analogy, right? I'm not insuring my heater in my basement because it's it's not as valuable at the end of the day. It's not as impactful as like the entirety of the
Exactly.
house, right? Or I'm making sure I insure my cars because if I can't get to work, I can't make money, like kind of things, right? There are certain values. I think that's the same kind of thing you have to do around your data sets is evaluate like, is this impactful enough that I need to like put controls around it, sensitivities around it?
That's a
Yes,
really good point.
then think about it. If not, then there's going to be, I think, a whole bunch of data that's just kind of like, it's okay. It's not as risky as this other stuff. But I being again, I really like this idea of like being able to solicit for feedback, communicate to the team like when you think there's data issues. I think there needs to be a very easy feedback loop for when people think they find issues to be able to funnel that back into the BI team. I think that's something that's probably a miss in many organizations is what is that feedback loop? Encourage people to find things, encourage people to ask questions. I think that that breeds a better data culture within that company.
Yeah.
Cool. Man, this was got like this topic got like it was got kind of lighthearted at the beginning and it kind of got better and deeper as we went along. This is really good. A lot of good notes on this one. So this will be a fun one to write up for a blog post later on or something like that. So with that, I just want to say thank you for everyone who's listening. I know it's like a holiday weekend and for I guess a good amount of people, 17 people view on YouTube. Thank you for hanging out with us. I hope we were able to instill some thoughts or some other trigger some brain thoughts here around some of the Power BI data things, governance and leaking of data. With that, our only ask for you is to, if you enjoyed the podcast, if you like what you're hearing here, if this made you think about these things, feel free to please. Our only ask is share it with somebody else. Just let somebody else know that you found the podcast valuable and you got some a couple chuckles and maybe learn something fun along the way. Tommy, where else can you find the podcast if you're not watching on live on YouTube?
So you can find the podcast anywhere a podcast is available. Subscribe on Apple and Spotify for all 69 episodes we have right now. 70 coming on Thursday, our resolutions. So that's a little sneak preview. So make sure on Spotify now you can actually leave ratings. So leave us a rating, share the word. If you want to join the conversation live, follow Power BI Tips on YouTube and LinkedIn for the new videos. Sometimes right at the time. Sometimes they're scheduled, but yeah, just like I said, or like Mike said, share the word.
Awesome. Well, thank you all very much. We'll see you on Thursday.